Welcome, friends. Thank you so much for joining us. I just want to confirm that Senator Mitchell is with you. There you are. Hi, Senator Mitchell. Thank you so much for being with us. Let's get started. So, my name is Brooke Wirtschafter. I'm the Director of Community Organizing here at ICAR, and we are privileged and delighted to welcome you all to a conversation today with ICAR and LA Voice. LA Voice is our multi-faith organizing partner, whom you'll hear more about. Several members of the LA Voice community are here also to share with us our questions and concerns and hopes and dreams for the state of California as we move through this really difficult time for all of us, and we work to build a vision for the kind of just society and just state, a place where we can all belong and have the kind of safety and support that we need to live our full lives. And so with that, I want to just welcome State Senator Hallie Mitchell. Hallie Mitchell represents many of the folks in our community and much of Mid-City and South Los Angeles. And she also serves as the State Senate's budget chair, and she's been a champion for justice issues throughout her career in public service. So Senator Mitchell, thank you so much for being with us. I'm going to hand over the floor right now to one of our members, Sam Bempong, who's going to give a credential, an opportunity for her to introduce the ICAR community and the LA Voice community to everyone here on the call together. So Sam.
Hi, Senator Mitchell. Personally, I'm a constituent. My name's Sam Bempong. I'm from ICAR. ICAR is a progressive Jewish spiritual community in LA with more than 800 families. We aspire to walk the talk and not just learn about what a good Jewish person does, but actually go out into the community and act as ethical citizens who care about social justice in our city, the country, and the world. In other words, we believe in applying what we learn in Torah to our everyday lives. We envision a world not as it is, but as it could be. We work in partnership with LA Voice, which is represented here today. LA Voice is a multiracial, multi-faith community organization that is awakening people to their own power by speaking, acting, and working together to transform LA County into one that reflects the dignity of all people. LA Voice represents 57 diverse churches, synagogues, and mosques, representing over 40,000 families in LA County. We are amplifying power by uniting diverse faith voices to stand up for what is needed in our various communities. As members of LA Voice, we are also members of PICO California, which currently is organizing in 75% of the state's Senate and Assembly districts, and is comprised of 480 interfaith congregations, schools, and neighborhood institutions, representing over 450,000 families. Although we come from various faiths, racial, and socioeconomic backgrounds, by joining together, we have come to learn and appreciate what we all have in common. We recognize that we are the most powerful when we work together to advocate for justice and equality for everyone in California, and we really appreciate you being here with us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sam. And now I'm going to ask Andrea Abrahamson to speak for a few minutes and to ask a question about the state budget. Andrea. If you can unmute yourself.
I have to unmute myself. Hello. Thank you, Senator, for taking our meeting and for your time today. My name is Andrea Anush Abramson. I'm a member of ICAR, and also I sit on the immigration table at LA Voice as an advocate. And I'm here to ask you a question about the state budget. As the budget chair for the state Senate, how are you working with your colleagues and governor to prioritize spending during these very difficult times? How are you crafting a moral budget that will help us rebuild California? Thank you.
You got it.
All right. I got 3 prompts and I kept hitting unmute, unmute, unmute. Zoom is gonna make us all technological giants by the end of all of this. So good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you this evening, to have conversation, which I think is really important, particularly now. So you are clear about the nature of the work I'm doing, and I get to hear from you firsthand about some of the concerns on issues you raise. I want to thank you for the question, and Sam, that tangerine wall was to die for. That was beautiful. So it was great seeing everybody. You know, the Constitution now requires that that the legislature passed a balanced on-time budget by June 15th, and I'm proud to say we were able to do it. And this year was a budget season like, quite frankly, none other. January, we had great news. The governor proposed a $222 billion budget with amazing investment opportunities to help expand really our economy, to help expand access to health care. It was just a great solid budget. It was also a responsible budget because it was going to allow us to continue to pay down debt in terms of CalPERS and CalSTRS debt ahead of time, ahead of schedule. It was going to allow us to continue to put money away in the various reserve and rainy day funds. And then COVID catapulted all of us into both a public health and economic pandemic. And everything changed, quite frankly, for the governor, I'm sure, for me as a California policymaker. And we had to shift gears. As chair of the Senate Budget Committee, that also makes me chair of something called the Joint Legislative Budget Committee. And we are the entity that in between the budget cycle or season, if the administration wants to make any kind of change to the budget, if they get new federal dollars and they need the legislature to approve allocation, it's the JLBC that weighs in and does that on behalf of the legislature. When we're during interim, on recess, or just when we're not in the budget season, when we're not acting on a budget. And so when the legislature went into recess March 16th, we gave the governor certain powers through executive order. We passed a bill on March 16th, SB 87, that allocated up to $1 billion of then current year dollars for the governor to do what he needed to do to support California residents. So that, occupied most of my time as budget chair, to review his executive order, to determine the appropriateness of the allocation. That's really the extent of my role as the leader of JLBC. And then we write letters that concur with his requested expense. This is down in the details, more than you probably ever want to know about the budget process. But I think it's relevant. People need to understand what happens when a pandemic hits the state. And so we were also then in the middle of our current budget cycle. The May revise was not the typical May revise. It was really a May new budget, where he basically had to scrap all of the good news from January and come up with what we've come to refer to as a working budget, to figure out ways in which we could close the multi-year $56 billion deficit. And why are we in a deficit? Because sales taxes are down, property taxes are down, the way in which the state earns income to fund the general fund were severely impacted by basically our entire state shutting down. And so we had a tough decision to make. The May revise included lots of cuts. It included cuts to K through 12. It included cuts to Health and Human Services programs, namely the MSSP and the CBAS program, the program that is a wonderful program designed to help keep seniors home versus in nursing homes. There were cuts to programs that we funded last year that the dollars hadn't been spent yet, and he pulled all those dollars back in. So the legislature really had to think long and hard, and I'm proud to be a member of the Senate. And the Senate made a decision the week before the May revise came out, and we basically crafted two value statements. And the value statements were we were not going to pass a budget that included short-term cuts that would have longer-term negative impacts on California residents who need government now more than ever. When you consider the unemployment rate in LA County, when you consider the industries that shut down, people are hurting. Secondly, we said we also weren't going to consider revenue generating strategies that were also going to hurt California residents. So we weren't going to include any kind of new tax on middle class Californians. So those were the two statements we made very publicly in terms of however whatever strategy we developed to approach this budget, we weren't going to do those two things. And I'm proud to say that we were able to pass a budget that did not. Much like the architecture of what the governor proposed in May, it does rely on support from the federal government. That A, I think is a complete reasonable expectation. And B, I will just say to you, I am confident will happen. And so the budget was balanced with a group of triggers. If we don't get the federal dollars, we will have to pull these triggers and certain cuts will happen. The difference in what we passed compared to what the governor proposed is his trigger list was much longer. We shortened our trigger list really to impact UC, CSU, the courts, and a couple of other programs, not nearly the kind of triggers that were going to impact the fundamental health and human services programs that California residents need even more so when we're experiencing an economic downturn. So we are in a recession. We will spend down some of our rainy day funds, not all of them, but I feel very good that it is a value-based budget because we didn't want to balance it on the backs of people who are already suffering.
Thank you so much, Senator Mitchell, for that explanation and for your work. We support the effort to make sure that our budget is based in our values, and we hear you on the need not to raise taxes on middle-income Californians, but we're going to turn now to asking you some questions about how the state can generate more revenue, because we also believe that while it was important not to overtax people, it's also important to recognize that there were so many already existing inequalities in the state that demanded new revenue to help address them, and that those haven't gone away. And in fact, the most impacted communities are even more impacted by COVID. So
I would agree.
I'm gonna now, thank you. So I'm now gonna hand it over to Marta Felicitas Galaderi, who is a member of LAUMA, the Latino Muslim Association here in Los Angeles and part of LA Voice, to ask a question. Marta, please go ahead.
Peace and blessings to everyone. Thank you very much for this space, Senator Holly Mitchell. And thank you for endorsing Proposition 15, which is the schools and community first. As you know, this proposition will reassess commercial property at current market values and will generate up to $12 billion per year to California schools and local government. This is what we really need. We, in the ground, will do our best to help in passing this proposition. But on your side, what are the ways you can show your support for this initiative? Would you be willing to talk to the governor about endorsing the proposition, and would you speak to the legislative Black Caucus and getting their endorsement as well? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. I was a very early endorser, and in fact, several years ago, introduced a bill with my then colleague, Senator Lonnie Hancock from Berkeley, in an effort to really do the same thing. We were in conversation with the early crafters of the initiative. And what they wanted was an opportunity to be able to have it scored, to have the ledge analysts or appropriations committee in the legislature really try to get to that bottom figure of what earnings we could be. So I was proud to carry the bill. We knew that we couldn't get it past the legislature. It required 2/3 vote. But the whole point was to introduce it in the legislative environment, get it assigned to a fiscal committee, and we were able to do that. So I just offer that as an example of the fact that I was a very early supporter before the initiative had even qualified, even before, quite frankly, signatures had begun to be collected. So I've been a long-term supporter. Secretly, my only concern is that it may not be enough money, but $12 billion a year is better than nothing, because we have a lot of work to do around, equity for K through 12 education across the state, as well as really recognizing what this COVID-19 experience is going to have on public education. I'm not sure if my word to the governor would make a difference, but I'd be happy when I have occasion to talk to him, to encourage him to endorse it. Happy to talk to my colleagues in the Black Caucus. And I've done all I can do. I've signed the pledge form. I've taped videos. I've given quotes. We've offered up and tried to float op-ed pieces to run in publications about why this is so important and why I support the initiative. So I'm there right with you. Glad that they've got their initiative numbers now, so we can really begin to talk to the public about why schools and families first really should be schools and families first. I support it.
Thank you so much. We appreciate your strong support and would really like to see the governor endorse it, and hope that you could use an opportunity to talk to him about why his endorsement would matter. So thank you. I'm going to turn now to Eric Stachel, who's a member of Leo Back Temple and also of LA Voice, to ask another question about generating revenue, because like you, we agree that the state is going to need more than that extra $12 billion a year from schools and communities first. So Eric.
Senator Mitchell, hi, good afternoon or evening.
Good afternoon.
So we know here at LA Voice that even if Proposition 15 passes, California will still need significant new revenue to meet the needs of all of our state's people. We'd like to know what specific proposals to raise revenue you personally support, and what and how can we work with you to get them passed?
I appreciate that. So of course, schools and families first, I wholeheartedly endorse. And I have to tell you that I wish we could be having this conversation maybe in 2 weeks. The legislature is beginning the process, and I'm just, to be perfectly honest, not at liberty yet to share the details, because as you can certainly understand, this is a scenario where leadership is really going to have to make sure that we cross every T, dot every I, and that we are bringing people along to be able to support these ideas. And we've got a really short ramp. This is the first week of July. This is the second calendar year of a legislative session, so we are supposed to recess August 31st. I say supposed to because with all that's going on, I wouldn't be surprised if the governor would not consider calling it an extraordinary session. We have a lot of work that's only getting heavier and more expansive with every passing day, and as our COVID crisis continues to expand and deepen and worsen. And so the challenge really is going to be the architecture of certain proposals, making sure we can get all of the vested interests and the parties to the table in alignment to get it done in a little over a month. And so there are conversations happening. You know, this week the Senate is in summer recess. We are having conversations with leadership. There is a committee of folk that have really continued to have the conversation about revenue generation. I'll be frank with you, I was not on that committee because my job was, let's get the budget passed, and we're going to have a kind of a dual track process around revenue generation. So in my caucus, the Senate Democratic Caucus, we've begun to have conversations. And I'm sorry, I'm not at liberty to share them yet because they're just not soup yet. And I think it's too important to make sure that we are able to strategically kind of map out this road, that I don't want to put the cart before the horse and share when we're not really to kind of share what the details are. But suffice it to say that we are clear, we must have revenue generating ideas. There have been some that have been floated around. It's times like this that everybody looks to the sin taxes because it feels like they're easy. And so I had two colleagues, Senator Dodd, Bill Dodd in the Senate, Adam Gray in the Assembly, who were considering online gaming and trying to capture revenue like so many states do currently by regulating online gaming. I think that that's probably not going to happen this year because the card rooms had issues as well as the gaming tribes. So, my point is, it's much like a balloon. Every time you push in one end, it pops out on another end. I think it's safe to say that that one's not going to see the light of day. There were just too many obstacles, but there are a couple of other ideas that we're working on that I hope to be able to share with you relatively soon, and that we'll be able to get across the finish line this year. It will be important that we do so.
Thank you. I just want to underscore for LA Voice that we support increasing the state's revenue, and that we hope that the legislature will look to the vast wealth that's generated in California, and not choose to put increased revenue generation on the backs of sin taxes or other things that are going to primarily tax lower income folks. I know that you share our values in that regard, and I would certainly hope, and I think we all would agree, that we would really hope to see that the revenue generation ideas come from a place of equity and and moving in a direction of taxation that is equitable, especially in these times that we're in, even more than was true before. So
I agree.
thank you.
And I have to tell you, I hadn't taken a position on the online gaming, but it is an interesting scenario. You know, it is happening. You know, it's much like the conversation around cannabis, whatever your position was to legalize or not cannabis. But much like cannabis, it was a scenario where it is happening. Other states have figured it out. And so I hope that we can at least come back to that conversation. If a balance can be found between communities that have game rooms, card rooms, I'm trying to say, as well as the tribes, you know, a balance I believe can be found. I think in this scenario, we just ran out of time.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. So I want to turn now to another area that I know is close to your own heart and close to all of ours, which is the issues around policing in the state of California. And for that, I'm going to ask Bryce Cracknell from McCarty Memorial Church, and also an LA Voice member, to ask the next question. Bryce?
Hey, thank you so much. And Senator Mitchell, thank you again for joining us today. While we've been working on these issues for many years, we recognize that right now, at this moment, is a great opportunity for us to make significant changes in how we address public safety in California. My question is, do you support the proposed bill by Senator Skinner and Assemblymember Carnella-Gerdove to reform the 911 system in the state and redirect calls and funds to non-emergency personnel for situations that do not require police involvement? And if so, what actions can the legislature take to defund the police and the criminal justice system while reimagining public safety?
Thank you very much for the question. And I had the pleasure to be on a call yesterday where Assemblymember Cam Lager and my colleague Senator Skinner were present, along with a number of other members who have a history of introducing legislation, including myself, around right-sizing the criminal justice system, right-sizing the juvenile justice system, and have carried bills around police accountability. I was a proud co-author of AB 392 and other bills. I've carried bills on my own around civil asset forfeiture. I've carried a bill on my own with regard to, you know, what happens, how we investigate law enforcement who through their actions, through excessive force, severely injure or kill people, and the fact that their investigations go through the you know, not the public court system. And so we were on this call yesterday with this group that the governor has convened to come back to him with suggestions around, you know, how we reimagine, reinvent policing in the state. And I have to tell you, it was the end of the day. I'd had a rough Zoom call with the director of the Employment Development Department. I was very frustrated, and I kind of lost it, but that's probably what needed to happen. And I said, you know, all of us on this call are committed, and we know how to get it done. You know, my question is, where's the governor? And if he is going to stand in courage and use this opportunity in history to barge through this crack of the door to affect some change, I'm right there with him. If that's not what he's going to do, let me know now, and I can direct my energies to my legislative colleagues to figure out what we can do, right? And so we got to have a really frank, honest conversation about what's happening to communities of color, that we are sick and tired of being sick and tired, and that this is our opportunity to affect change, that we have long histories of trying to negotiate and work with the District Attorneys Association, the Sheriff's Association, the Police Chiefs Association, and without fail, they have opposed every reform piece of legislation we bring to the table. We talked about the dozens of bills that we brought for about body cameras and everything having to do with accountability. And so this is the opportunity. I absolutely support Ms. Kamlager and Ms. Skinner's bill. From my perspective, we have to demilitarize the police. We have to stop sending police to do the work that social workers, mental health professionals should. And so if we're going to be about action versus talk, then we have to make sure that we develop the infrastructure and fund programs in order to make that happen. I'll give you an example of how I had to do that kind of in a two-step experience in the past. I've carried a bill to acknowledge that minors who are victims of sex trafficking are victims. For far too long, those young women, largely, and men, were seen as criminals and would get prostitution charges. And so we were decriminalizing their activity. It was fashioned by some on the far right that I was legalizing prostitution. That is not what we did. We were decriminalizing it for minors. Before we carried that bill, the year before, we through the budget process, helped create an infrastructure at the county government through county probation and county foster care to create the space where these kids could be supported so that their cases wouldn't go to the criminal court or the juvenile court, but would go to the child welfare services kind of side of government to provide them with support and services that we need. So we created the programs, the pilots, the models, and the funding source. Then the next year we came back with the bill to decriminalize. And so that's what I'm hoping we have the opportunity with this defund the police experience, that we score the savings and redirect it to the kinds of programs that we know our communities need. You know, the fact that my constituents call the police when there's someone having a mental health crisis on the street, as opposed to having another option like this bill will create to call, is a problem. The fact that people call the police when there are tent cities of our unhoused family, friends, and neighbors on their block, in their alley, they don't know what else to do, they call the police, that's a problem. The fact that people call the police on kids in foster care who've already been traumatized, and because we haven't done a better job in identifying that trauma and making sure that we're placing them in the appropriate out-of-home placement to meet that need, and they bounce from placement to placement. And when a foster parent gets frustrated or a group home employee gets frustrated and it's a situation that's out of control, they call the police. And that's not what those children need. So I absolutely support the bill. I will and am looking at, you know, bills that are being introduced as we speak, as we go through the process, that will continue to move us to a place where police will be doing the job of law enforcement. You know, LA Times article yesterday was fascinating. Out of a million 911 calls, it was the vast minority. It was such a small percentage of those calls that were actually for violent crime, and how many of those calls were not calls that really warranted law enforcement. It warranted intervention and help and support from a trained professional, but not law enforcement. I am thrilled that we're beginning to have that conversation and we're going to see movement, and I absolutely support their bill.
Great, thank you. Continuing on this topic of policing, I want to turn to Reverend Eddie Anderson, who's the pastor at McCarty Memorial Church and also an organizer with LA Voice, and someone I think you probably know well, to ask about how we break up with police unions. So Reverend Eddie.
Thanks, Brooke, and hello, my friend, Senator Mitchell. So good to see you.
Good to see you.
Before I ask my question, I want to say thank you for standing up at MLK Hospital. I was part of that letter that signed and said we need more funding, so thank you for always fighting for our folks. But back to the question. So as Bryce said, this is a moment, a great opportunity to reimagine public safety and also reassess the outside influence that police unions have long had on our politics. We'll be asking every elected official and candidate we speak with in the next year to pledge not to take future donations, contributions, or endorsements from police, sheriffs, and prison guard unions. In your campaigns for Assembly, you have accepted donations from the California Correctional Peace Officers Association. An independent committee supporting your opponent in the race for the LA County Supervisor received $500,000 from the Los Angeles Deputy Sheriff's PAC. Whichever of you is elected LA County Supervisor will have an important role in overseeing the sheriff's and probation departments, both of which have very recently been embroiled in brutality scandals at the jails and juvenile halls they run. So the question is, will you show your commitment to holding them accountable and draw a meaningful contrast with your opponent by pledging not to take any further money from the police, sheriffs, prison guard unions, or affiliated PACs?
I appreciate the question, and I have made that pledge. I have actually signed the pledge. You know, let me say this. I think it's important to me personally, I just have to say, to when we tie money and donations to action, it's important for me just to say out loud that I am not for sale, that, you know, the Shirley Chisholm 1972 campaign motto about unbought and unbossed, and I'm simply not for sale. I have never received endorsement from law enforcement. I've gone to the endorsement interviews because I think it's important that they ask me the questions and I answer them, and that we're clear about where I stand on issues. And even in my assembly races where I was supported by the prison union representatives more so than line law enforcement, you know, that absolutely had no bearing on the legislation I've carried and the votes I've taken. I've served on Public Safety Committee my entire elected career in the Assembly and Senate. And you can look at my voting record and see that I have been true to my community. I am clear about this current inflection point, and I'm also clear about, you know, independent expenditure committees. I think because of my voting record, it is clear that there would never be a law enforcement funded IE to support me, just based on my history and my success in getting criminal justice reform, juvenile justice reform, and police accountability bills passed and signed by now 2 administrations. But I have taken the pledge. I do think it's complicated in this race, given what's happening at this moment in time with this sheriff, the role that the law enforcement unions have really leaned in to attempt to play to influence the outcome of races is problematic. And I have taken the pledge not to accept their dollars, not that I can imagine that they would be coming my way anytime soon.
Thank you. We are grateful that that you have taken that pledge. And again, we intend to ask every elected official and candidate for office that we speak with over the next year to make a similar pledge. So thank you for being a leader on that front, as on many others. I want to turn now to another issue that's close to us, and I know to you. We're going to have a couple of questions now about housing. So first, I want to ask Steve Burns from ICAR to ask a question now about tenants' rights. Steve?
And Steve, before you get started, let me say this. This is proof that I am a real person. I am home tonight because of, you know, the safe at home, and I'm having plumbing issues. The plumber was supposed to be here at 3 o'clock. He's not shown up yet. So in the event that he rings my bell, I'm gonna have to step away for 1 quick second and go unlock my back gate so the plumber can handle my situation. So I just wanted to say that to you all now in case I have to say, he's here and step away for 2 seconds. Please forgive me, but I'm a real person with real challenges like all of you. And my challenge today is plumbing. So Steve, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I'll take your question now.
No, that's why we like you, because you're a real person. So and I think we all understand. Many of us have worked on housing and homeless issues before the coronavirus. But right now we're facing a looming crisis of evictions once the moratorium expires. Delaying rent will not be enough for many tenants who are barely getting by and have lost their jobs. Moreover, we're nowhere near meeting the goals for building new housing that Governor Newsom proposed. How will you and your colleagues prevent the pandemic from worsening our housing crisis?
What a question, Steve. You know, we spend a lot of time talking about that. When SB 50 failed, my leader, President Pro Tem Toni Atkins, made a declarative statement that she was going to make sure that there was a housing production package up for consideration this year. And there are several bills moving through the process to talk about that. And, you know, the challenge, as I always say to my constituents who are very opinionated about the issue, is when we talk about housing production, the question is what we build, where we build it, and for whom we build. COVID-19 is exasperating our situation because while I have always questioned and challenged the 60,000 homeless count number that we talk about, I challenge it because, you know, I know that's a point in time count. And it doesn't often capture the people who are living in their cars. It doesn't capture people who are couch surfing. It doesn't capture people who are on the edge, and but for that carburetor or that plumbing issue, you know, that $400 unanticipated expense, according to the Federal Reserve Bank, that 40% of Americans aren't in a position to handle. But for whatever that crisis is, you become homeless, you know, in the matter of weeks. I think that number could probably be as high as double. That was pre-COVID. With COVID, while the city of LA and municipalities across the state have stepped in to protect renters from eviction now, what does that mean when we turn the corner on the pandemic and the whole enchilada comes due? What does that mean for the mom and pop property owner like myself? I own a duplex. And when I bought the duplex, it was to allow my mother to age in place. And it was a long-term plan, also an investment opportunity for a single working woman like myself, single parent. And, you know, being able to collect rent is how I frankly qualified for the loan to buy the duplex. And so there's so many people in my very same boat. Many of my constituents that I've heard from who have fourplexes or small apartment buildings, that it was their retirement plan. And they are now retired, and it's the rents that they collect that they live off of. And so this is a complex, multi-layered situation. When I look at my Senate district, and even the areas that are single family home dominated, research is showing me how house poor so many of those people are. And their ability to hold on is so fractured. And so, you know, we're going to have to do it all. We have to do more construction. We have to have those tough political conversations about what we build, for whom and where. We have to have those tough conversations about density, where we build and what we build. And I'm hoping our shared life experience going through COVID-19 will create a different sense of urgency and empathy while we have these conversations. But there is a production package that will go through, and we have to figure out how we create this sense of balance. I think government stepped in and did the right thing to create an emergency Band-Aid, if you will, in declaring no evictions. The legislature, my colleagues, Senator Bradford and Senator Hertzberg, led a committee that the Pro Tem appointed them and came up with this idea how to help the mom and pop property owners, like I suggested, who aren't collecting rents from tenants with a tax break down the road. And we're still trying to figure out if that's the best way to provide relief to people like me, quite frankly. There's going to be a whole lot of throwing stuff on the wall and see what sticks to help us get through this. But we're clear about the unique needs of every segment that I've talked about, and what role government should do, what role banking institutions should play in helping people navigate this, so we don't look up a year from now where we've got this mass sweep of evictions or this mass sweep of homeowners losing their properties, where developers and others have come in and preyed upon us. We're going to have to be thoughtful and forward-thinking in protecting renters and homeowners from that fate.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And, you know, we support those efforts collectively, and want you to know that we as LA Voice support efforts to increase density in our own neighborhoods. We understand that the solutions to these problems include more density and more housing, and that our history of segregation is tied to the history of zoning, and that if we are truly to undo so much of the racial wrongs in this state and across this country, we have got to address zoning issues too. So thank you for taking that on.
And those are conversations that, whatever, regardless of piece of legislation that's up for consideration, those are consistent conversations we have to continue to have. As I was raked over the coals by so many of my constituents around SB 50, you know, my common refrain was, you say no to SB 50, what do you say yes to? And you can't stop me at the market or when I'm pumping gas to say, Senator Mitchell, what are you going to do about the homeless? No, it's what we all are going to do, and what kind of civilized LA city and county we all want to call home and live in, where we've done all that we can to make housing affordable and available to all, not just those who have the luxury of having it now.
Yeah, well, we support those efforts, so thank you. Continuing on this theme of homelessness, I'm going to turn now to Naomi Goldman, an ICAR member, and I know someone that you also know well, who has a long history of working on issues of homelessness and has a question for you about that. Naomi.
Thank you. This is Old Home Week. Hey, Naomi.
Hey, Holly, how are you? Good to see you. So I'm going to pick up where Steve started, talking a little more on homelessness, and I have kind of two questions. And one, you did touch on that the homeless count numbers in LA County pre-COVID, January, showed a 13% increase in LA County, with a large spike in South LA, rising homelessness among young adults, among families, among seniors, and a disproportionate number of Black people experiencing homelessness relative to the population. So two things. One, with the advent of COVID-19, the state created Project Roomkey to help move our most at-risk neighbors into hotel and motel rooms temporarily to reduce their exposure. So as that funding may sunset, can you talk a little bit about the state's plan to help transition that to a permanent housing plan that I've heard dubbed Project Homekey, and how that affects people who are currently residing in those sites, and how does that work with LA County's COVID-19 homeless recovery plan, which the Board of Supervisors just passed last week?
And I heard about what they passed, and I need to read it, so I'm clear about what LA County did. But let me tell you what the state did. Project Roomkey I thought was innovative and right on time. I led a Senate delegation trip 2013, I think it was my first year in the Senate, to Utah to look at Utah's model. You know, Utah has been touted for having figured out a way to reduce their chronic homeless population by 90% over a 10-year period. One of their many strategies that I saw firsthand and learned about during that trip, and others, was this, you know, motel conversion, because the cost effectiveness to you know what it costs to take two adjoining rooms and convert that to a 2-bedroom apartment is pennies on the dollar compared to what it costs for new construction. And just the layout and the infrastructure for these, you know, mid-size motel hotels with ample parking, and just the infrastructure makes perfect sense. I was sad that LA County couldn't reach their numbers of trying to get 15,000 rooms that people placed. And so it's going to be an interesting dynamic about how we negotiate with these motel owners. Maybe with the state dollars in this transition, perhaps more will be interested in actually selling these motel properties versus leasing temporarily. There are major corridors. I don't know if the county has done it, but I would be very interested to see all of the properties, the motel properties, that kind of meet the specs of what's helpful in terms of a size, of how many are in LA County. I know in my own Senate district and in the second supervisorial district, there are major, thoroughfares, Century, Slauson, major corridors, but there are multiple facilities. And looking at the Utah model, where it was a public-private philanthropy partnership, and in Utah, the church was also involved, but in figuring out ways in which we can use the private sector philanthropy and government to come together around acquiring these facilities, doing the conversions, and then making sure that there are nonprofits in place to help run them. There's one such facility in Culver City, my district, that has helped families and former foster youth for years. And so we also have to make sure that, the supportive element of the permanent supportive housing is really there, and people have the support and resources they need in order to remain housed. And so in the state budget this year, there is additional funds for homelessness, for affordable housing, tax relief, and some other strategies. The way in which we divided the resources is very similar to a methodology that we developed last year, where dollars go to cities, counties, and COCs to support very few streams, to support the local government in figuring out what works for them versus kind of a state top-down approach. The governor is very committed to the concept of Project Room Key, and so there is an expectation that some of those dollars can be used to allow to continue to pay for the rooms for the people who were benefited via COVID, but to then even expand it in terms of expand the population would be eligible, not just unhoused 65 and over who were at highest risk to acquire the virus. And so I think it's a great model based on what I saw in Utah all those years ago, and I hope we're able to continue to push it. When I think of some of these motels in some of the communities in my district, that some of them, are perceived by the community as undesirable. The perception that illicit activities happen in those motels on a regular basis. So to be able to use those properties and convert them and add those units into our much needed housing stock, I support 100%.
Thank you, Senator Mitchell. I want to turn now to another issue that's close to LA Voice's heart, and I'm sure to yours too. LA Voice, as you know, is an organization that's made up of people of many faiths and many races from across LA County. And so, of course, the rights of immigrants are vitally important to us because so many of the members of our communities are themselves immigrants. So now I'm going to ask Jenny Broca from New City Church to ask a question about how we can support immigrants in this difficult time. Jenny?
Hi, Senator. Thank you so much for being with us and hearing our voices. And I'm a member also of New City Church and also volunteer for LA Voice. Our communities are experiencing an alarming and disproportionate rate of COVID infection, also death, and overlapping groups, which includes immigrants, Latinos, and Blacks, many whom are exposed through their work, which is essential businesses. Would you, as a leader, and use your leadership to guarantee, and use it for the state to guarantee access for healthcare, regardless of immigration status? And will you also use your leadership so that the state provides a second round of financial relief for those that are not eligible for the federal relief? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. I appreciate you. Yes, this virus is not, equal opportunity. It has preyed upon those who can least afford it, who can least withstand the attack of the virus, both in terms of our health and economically. The Advancement Project has done this amazing targeting kind of visual where it shows LA County and then over time how the virus spread, and you can see it's like a wave, and how it went from west to central to south. And then it's you know, color coded, and you see the red just spread like a virus over the map in communities that where people of color, poor people, immigrant people live, quite frankly. And so you can actually see this visual representation over the course of the last, you know, 4 months. And it is just breathtaking to realize that, you know, communities that have disproportionately lacked access to affordable, safe, quality housing, who have historically lacked access to necessary healthcare services, who have historically had to utilize public transportation, who've historically been hourly workers on the front line, and how it has impacted. Which is why my work in making sure that the cuts proposed and made revised to King Hospital wouldn't go into effect, when I recognize that Martin Luther King Community Hospital serves about 50% Black, 50% Latinos, and yet on my visit yesterday, heard from Dr. Batchelor, who talked about 85 patients, all Latinx, who are COVID positive in the hospital right now. And so we've got to make sure that our community institutions that have been there for us continue to be there for us and have the resources they need to continue to provide these services. I was very proud of the governor through his executive orders, and recognizing that the love from the federal government was not going to hit a certain segment of our population, our undocumented brothers and sisters. And so the monies he directed to the iBank to provide support to small businesses and micro businesses, regardless of immigration status, was very important. And I hope that he will continue to invest in that fund. Secondly, I've always, and a proud member of the Democratic caucus that has supported, you know, access to healthcare services for all who qualify, regardless of immigration status. And so we've been able to do that incrementally. We first took care of the kids, you know, up to 19. The next year we went 19 to 26. And this year, while it's unfortunate that it doesn't go into effect immediately, it's out a few years in the budget around affordability, but we've finally gotten to the undocumented seniors who, but for their immigration status, would qualify for Medi-Cal. And so we're going to continue, you know, now that we've got that on the books, you know, my little secret would be that in the next few years, as hopefully, knock on wood, the economy recover, that maybe we can expedite the implementation of that new policy. We've got the policy, that's important. It didn't go into effect July 1. I can't remember, I want to say it's 2022 or 23, but it would be my hope that in future budget years, as we get on solid footing, that we make that go into effect much sooner. I think those are examples of our ongoing commitment. The fact that we have supported the community clinic kind of universe to make sure that they have the resources they need to provide testing to anyone who shows up, regardless of ability to pay and status, is very, very important. Which is why, because they're doing such a good job, I think that's also why we're getting clear about our numbers. It's not just the fact that too many of us are not taking precautions and wearing our masks and socially distancing and washing hands, but it's also because we are now being able to capture more and more of the reality because more people have the opportunity to test. When I was at King Hospital yesterday in Watts Willowbrook, the county was doing testing across the street. And as I was leaving, I saw a guy in a vest directing cars. I said, "What's the wait from this last car?" 4.5 hours. So I think the city, the county, all of us need to step up and do a better job of making testing available. I am proud to host a testing site at 118th Street School in the 30th Senate District. It's a three-way partnership with LAUSD, because it's at a school site, myself, and St. John's Well Family Clinic. And I think those kind of unique partnerships have to come together. I was able to use my bully pulpit as a senator when St. John's had been trying to connect with the LAUSD and they weren't making it happen. I could be the bridge builder, bring them both together help them identify a school. And so we're doing testing. I think more people are going to have to figure out how to be creative and come up with ways to make sure more testing is available.
Thank you. And we appreciate your work on guaranteeing health care for immigrants. It's so obvious to us, as I'm sure it is to you too, that particularly in this moment of pandemic, all our health is connected to one another. And all of the people who live here need health care so that all of us can get healthy and be healthy. And so the sooner that we have full access is the only way we're going to get to health.
And I think that this is one of the few, but silver linings in this cloud, because when I think about my colleagues in the legislature who have not supported it, who say make narrow-minded comments like, well, you know, my constituents who are citizens don't all have access, or they can't afford their health care. Or why are we doing more for inmates in state prisons than, you know, my law-abiding residents? You know, why are we doing that? Well, this virus has awakened everyone. And so, you know, the work we're doing in terms of trying to remediate the spread of the virus in the prisons is important, because those correctional officers go home and they go to your communities. And if they've been inappropriately exposed or not been supported, and we haven't done what we need to do for anybody in a congregate living situation, now it's everybody's problem. And so, same as you just said, so I think some of my colleagues who have made some of those narrow-minded kind of statements have a deeper new understanding that, like you said, we are all connected. And the health of the least among us is as important as it is for everybody else.
Thank you. I'm going to turn now, as we reach almost the end of our hour, to Brianna Shepard. Brianna is a co-chair of ICAR's community organizing team, and I'm going to hand it to Brianna.
Hi, thank you so much, Senator Mitchell. We actually do a lot of work in our community and want to know what can we do to support your work specifically, and how we can work together toward our shared goals. I know you spoke about a lot of things, but if there's anything that sort of comes to mind that we could share with our community, we would love to support you.
I appreciate that. I think, you know, I talked about being a member of the California Legislative Black Caucus, and we have several bills that we are promoting. If you go to the CLBC website, you'll see those bills. I have a bill there, Senate Bill 144, that talks about fines and fees. We really wanted to use this moment in history where we have the attention of the world, where people are having the most honest conversations about race and class that I've ever really seen in my lifetime, that are being sustained over time. Now is the time for us to, you know, as people are being empowered, as people are being educated, to really talk about systemic policy change. And so Chairwoman Shirley Weber of the caucus, I'm principal co-author, carried ACA 5, that's now been qualified for the ballot, to talk about affirmative action again. You know, Prop 209 was promulgated during a time where racism was being promoted by a governor who was trying to be president. So when you think about Prop 209, Prop 187, Prop 227 that talked about English language only, we're in a very different time. Mm-hmm. Insurance Commissioner Ricardo Lara was able to get a ballot initiative qualified a couple of years ago to reverse 227 around the language stipulation. And now is our opportunity with a whole new crop of California voters to really talk about the impact Prop 209 had on the diversity of our publicly funded institutions, and the lack of diversity and the impact it had on women-owned businesses around government contracting. And so to have a conversation about how affirmative action is not quotas. Quotas have never been legal, but how affirmative action does help aid and abet leveling the playing field around economics for communities who have been historically, artificially left behind, I think is very important. And so this is going to be a powerful ballot in November. we have the opportunity, I believe, to replace the man in the White House
Mhm.
with someone who is more closely aligned to our core values, someone who doesn't not only espouse hate, but generate and fan the flames of hate in our nation.
Mhm.
All the way down the ballot to the locals, the ballot initiatives, Students and Families First, hopefully affirmative action, and many others that I think will help us have the resources, have the policies in place to create sustained systemic change that, from my humble opinion, our time has come.
Beautiful. Really inspiring. I just want to say thank you. Thank you to you, Senator Mitchell, for fighting for all Angelenos and for Californians. You know, we're grateful to have you in our corner. And we started out talking about how we try to not just walk the talk, but really bring our work into the world, seeing the world as not as it is, but as it could be. And I just personally feel very hopeful having you in this place of power. And I just really appreciate you and thank you for joining us. And I know Brooke's gonna close it out, but thank you so much, really.
Well, I appreciate that, because like I said, I got frustrated yesterday, and sometimes I just think, can I take another step? And then I wake up the next day and realize that I have to. But I am clear that I cannot do it by myself. And my long-time history with Pico, California, going back to before I was elected, when I was a lobbyist for the Western Center on Law and Poverty. So between Pico, California and LA Voice, and now ICAR, your work, your collective organizing, your effort to help spread the word, and help galvanize people and really make people stop and think about what role they play in helping to create the kind of civilized society we all want to grow old in and raise our children in. So please know, I tip my hat to you all, encourage you to just keep fighting like me. If we all just keep taking one step ahead, we'll get to the other side. So I appreciate your support and partnership.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Mitchell. We're really grateful for your time and for your leadership and for your inspiration. We are working together across ICAR and across LA Voice to try to heal this city and this county and this state and God willing, this nation. And like you, we agree that it's time for us to have the difficult conversations and to envision a just society, a place where we all belong, where there is space for all of us to grow together and to grow old. There is plenty here for all of us. And it's a matter of how we prioritize and how we distribute it. So thank you for your work and your time today. We look forward to hearing from your office about some of the matters that you mentioned that you weren't able to fully unveil to us today. So I hope we'll hear from your team soon about what are the revenue generating proposals that you're supporting and how can we work with you to support those as well. And again, just want to thank you on behalf of ICAR and LA Voice. Thanks so much, and thanks everybody.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. Thank you.